Hi everyone, welcome to another DSLayered episode. We're Josh and Ethan again, and we're finishing up our Business Warehouse for the BusinessObjects community podcast series with this episode. Welcome Ethan, how you doing?
Hey Josh, I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you. So once again we're on the opposite sides of the world, so it's morning for me and evening for Ethan. So Ethan, what are we going to be covering today?
Well, we wanted to show a scenario where we pull in some additional data from something that's maybe like an HR database that's separate from the sales database. And so what we're doing is we're just pulling in a few extra attributes on employee, things like cost center, age group, job type. Since our HR database has a different employee code than our sales database, we have to establish a little bit of a mapping. And so I'll show how to do that, and yeah, we'll show how to map in some data using the master data lookup. And since our HR database has some time dependency, it loads multiple versions of employee. We'll show how BW can take that from a relational schema and bring it into a BW schema, time dependent info object, pretty easily. So, and then we'll discuss a couple of other options of ways to bring that in differently if we want to, but we're just going to show the one option today. Yeah,
excellent. And just to recap, where back in the original episode where we started talking about doing this series, all we really wanted to show was it's fine using BW as a data warehouse if you only use ECC as your data source. And what we wanted to show was two non-SAP data sources being brought in. The first one, and it was more of a data mart scenario, bringing in this data mart and building that in BW and exposing it through BusinessObjects. But then this is where we kind of get to the crux of what we wanted to cover, which is adding in another data source which isn't really related, and we have to do some kind of mashing together of data to start to build out our data warehouse.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, building a data warehouse takes more governance, more architecture than what we're doing. So it's still kind of like a multi-source data mart. But if you do that for long enough, and you keep disciplined about going back and reviewing what you've done and fixing it up so that you have an enterprise-wide strategy, eventually you end up with a data warehouse. So.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, let's jump into it, everyone. And Ethan, over to you to fire up your.
Great. So, desktop. Yeah, I'm going to screen share as always, and let's get started. So, okay. So we've got. We just want to take a look kind of from beginning to end again. So if you remember, over the last few episodes, what we did was we loaded a sales database schema, this sample sales STS, using data services into BW, into a bunch of master data info objects, and into a DSO for our transactional data. And then we created a multi-provider and a BEX query and a connection to BusinessObjects tools and universes. And so what we're going to do today is take this sample human resources database, which is a different data store in the BusinessObjects repository, and take some specific tables from that and pull it in so that we can supplement our sales data with some information from this employee database. If we take a look at the employee table, we will see that that it has an employee number which sounds the same as what we had in the sales database, but it's actually not the same employee number, so we'll have to create a mapping. And you'll also note here that we actually have two different tables of each type, and it's because Josh was kind enough to recreate them a little bit more friendly to BW. In the original table type, we had things like spaces in the field names, like headcount space status, and BW wasn't very happy with that, which seems to be a bug and will probably be fixed. When you pull in a data source from data services into BW, if it seems that if it has a space in the field right now, it doesn't work very well. You can do things in BW like shortening the field name, but the space was a bit of a problem. So we've got tables here that don't have spaces in their field names, and that wasn't an issue. So we'll hop over to BW and take a look at what I've set up really quickly. Again, we're not going to spend very much time on this piece as far as pulling in data because it's the same as what we did in the second episode. But we've created a new source system in BW for the HR data, which goes right alongside our sales data. And then within that source system, you can just click on Display Data Source Tree here. I've created 5 new data sources, one for age group, cost center, employee, job, and person. Person has a first name, last name. Job is a job number and a job description. Employee is all of the employee data around that we just looked at, around like start date, end date, job position, grade, all kinds of stuff that you would normally have in an HR system for employee. And then cost center and age group are, of course, the cost center and age group that the employee belongs to. I've created info objects as well around this. And the interesting thing in this situation, for this exercise, is that as far as the employee for HR, I created a new employee info object here for the HR employee. We're actually going to use a BW functionality called time dependency. So when you create an info object in BW and you add attributes to it, you can define whether or not those attributes are time dependent. And if you define time dependency, then it actually adds essentially another attribute to the info object, a from date and a to date. And then when you load new data, you can populate those, and it will keep track of, for any given time, what was the value of this attribute. So you can have, in 2007, you could have an employee in a different cost center than that employee is in 2008, which you really need to be able to do for data like employee data, or we talked about this for hierarchies as well. That's a major feature for hierarchies in BW. So
similar to a type 2 slowly changing dimension. So
yeah,
exactly. Traditional data warehousing.
Right, exactly. So it allows you to have slowly or even quickly changing dimensions, and it gives you the option. I mean, as we talked about before, like in BW, you can, if you've modeled things on master data like this and with navigational attributes or just as regular attributes, then every time you report, depending on what key date you choose for your reporting, for your query, it will show you the value of the attribute at that key date. What you can also do is when you populate data in an info provider, you can do a master data lookup, which is what we're going to show today. And when you do that master data lookup, you can either use the current date or a key date of some sort, or a date taken from from somewhere else. And so I'll show how that works. We've got that set up. So we loaded HR employee, and I'll just take a moment and show you what that data looks like in HR employee. It looks a little bit different because of the time dependency. So we can see that for any given employee, like this employee, Robert Williams, whose number is 20199, we actually have 4 records. And normally in a master data in an info object, you'd only have 1 record per key. But we have a compound key here. We have an HR employee number, and we have a valid to in the key. And then there's a valid from date and a valid to date for every line. And so any date you choose between the year 1000 and the year 9999 will correspond to one of these lines. And BW's smart enough to figure that out in various scenarios, in a query, in a master data lookup. So this is before he joined the company, and then all the way up through the present. So let's take a look at how that works, how that time-dependent master data is populated, because this is a little different than what we saw before in our data loads. I'm just going to focus on the employee here and not the name. So this is our transformation that we've created. It loads from the data source directly, from the employee data source. And what we do is we've got, again, 2 key fields. We've got the employee number, and we've got the the date 2 is usually the key field, is always the key field in a time-dependent master data object for BW. And I've actually made that into a constant here because actually all we have in the source data is the date of upload, which would really be the date that it's valid from. And we don't really know what date it's valid to. So I set it to the end of time, and BW actually has a functionality to, when you get overlapping master data, to figure out, to kind of cut it off, so you get dates that bump up against each other properly. So there's an option in the data transfer process that I'll show you that does that. And then we've got this fancy formula here, which actually just reformats the date from the source system, which is actually a timestamp, not a date, into a date that works for BW. And then other than that, we just map in age group, cost center, gender, and job. The way that we get, so normally if you load that using this data transfer process, because there are 4 records coming in for that employee, and you're trying to update master data, usually it will fail because BW doesn't allow you to update master data with multiple records with the same key. So in order to deal with that, you use this option in the DTP called handle duplicated record key. And this works in 2 different ways. If it's not time-dependent master data, it just takes the last record with the key. But if it is time-dependent master data, and what I did was I just triggered the F1 help. So if you choose handle duplicated record key and then hit F1, it will explain how it works. If you do have time-dependent master data, what it does is you can, as long as you give it a date from and some date to, based on the order that the records come in, it will make them cover all of the time periods that that exist. So it has a little example here. If one record is valid for all of 2006, and another record comes in that's valid for half of 2006 and all of 2007, then it will actually modify the first record when it's updating the master data, so that it only is valid until the second record kicks in. So it's kind of a nice functionality, and it allowed me, using only those date from values in the source data, to create this this pretty semantically valid employee master data. So then the question is, how do we get that? We've got this nice employee info object master data from our HR database. How do we get that merged in to the employee that we've got in our sales database, which is up here? And the answer there is 2-part. We need a mapping. And I've simply put the mapping directly onto this employee. I've added a new field called HR employee, which is the HR employee number. And then I've added the job, cost center, and age group fields. And in this case, I just manually edited the master data and added some mappings. You can go to maintain master data. And I added some mappings for HR employee. So we can do a new one here. Actually, I don't remember any numbers, but we can edit this one and use one of the ones that we've already got, 13788. And so I can do this manually, but what you can also do is just have a new data source for a flat file, or if you've got the information in another database, you can load just the sales employee number and the HR employee number, just those 2 columns, and it will, when you load master data, it will only update the columns that you load. So it won't overwrite anything else here if you upload a new HR employee number. So that would normally be how you do it, but in this case I'm just doing it manually. We save it, back out. Oops. Didn't want to save there. And then we have to activate the master data. Anytime you manually change master data, you have to activate it. If you load using a DTP, usually you don't have to activate it. And then I've created a separate transformation, which is a transformation from employee to employee, so it's a loop transformation. And what this transformation does is, you can see, for pretty much everything, it just copies it across directly, so it maintains what's already there, and for HR employee. But for job, cost center, and age group, it does a master data lookup. So it goes to HR employee and gets that attribute, and then adds it to our sales employee. That's pretty straightforward. If you go into edit mode, I can show you some of the just how it makes the options available. So you map in the source info object. You choose the read master data rule type, and then it gives you a list of things of info objects that have that attribute, more or less. And you choose the one that you want to take it from. And then in our case, we have a time-dependent, again, info object, or an info object with time-dependent attributes. So we have to tell it what key date to use, which one of those 4 records we looked at before to use. And we'll do that, in this case, based on the current date. But you also have options to define a constant date. Or you can have a start date or an end date, or you can choose, this is for the constant date, I believe. Oops. Yeah, not very helpful help there. Or you can choose to take the date from another field. So, for example, we could do the lookup based on birth date or hired date, because those are the fields that are available that we've got in our employee record that have date fields, that have date formats. But you could also do it based on some kind of effective date or something like that. In this case, we're going to keep it simple and do it based on the current date. And I'll run that for you just to show that record that we have there will get populated with those attributes. And it goes fast. I mean, master data lookup in BW is, since it was slow at one point in time, and there's now actually another rule type called the DSO lookup rule type, which does the same sort of lookup on a DSO. But now so it used to do those record by record. So for every record, there was a select statement sent to the database. Not very fast. Now it's much faster. They've rewritten it so that for every data package, which is in BW by default 50,000 records, but you can make it however big you want, it does a single select statement. So it gathers up all the keys, and then it does a single select statement with all those keys to find all of the lookup records for that package, and then from that table in memory, it will do all the lookups. So it found the proper attribute values. So now Charlotte Cooper matches Ian Devling, which is obviously incorrect, but it just grabs them off that info object. So this is how you do master data lookups and DSO lookups in BW. It's not a join concept. It's kind of conceptually a different approach, but it actually does the same thing as a right outer join. Or left join as a normal join. You can also do joins directly in BW using an info set or something we'll talk about a little bit later, a composite provider. So we've got our employee now. I made those new attributes navigational, so we can use them in our reporting directly. I've added employee to that transformation shouldn't be blanked out, but that's interesting that it is. Oh, I changed something in it. Yeah, I changed something to cause it to deactivate when I was playing with those, when I was showing you those info objects. So I've added the employee to the order details DSO, now in data fields down here. And I've added the navigational attributes of employee so that we can use them for reporting. So we've got age group checked off, cost center, and job are all checked off. And I've added those also to our abstraction, our multi-provider. So they're in there as well. So we've got a new employee dimension, and we've got oops, we've got navigational attributes for all those things. One thing I should be clear about, actually, when you're dealing with navigational attributes and hierarchies, and this popped up and bit us at the end of the last episode, Josh, I don't know if you remembered, but it was a long time ago. You can have to do something called an attribute change run. And if I can find the thing, yeah, this has a hierarchy. So when you change the hierarchy, there's actually a little, over in these object information sections, I believe, something can pop up. Here it is. It's in the info objects view, and then this little thing pops up that says its characteristic is selected for activation in a change run. And then I believe that you can go up to tools. Yeah. And you have to do, if you change a hierarchy or change a navigational attribute, you need to apply the hierarchy or attribute change. And this is kind of an old BW thing where you have to do this so that BW has a very kind of large or complicated system of foreign key relationships that it uses to keep its master data and transactional data separate but related. And when you change a hierarchy or something like that, it updates some of those foreign keys. But in order to keep transactional data integrity, it doesn't immediately update your transactional data. So that's actually a pretty computationally intensive process sometimes. So in order to control that, they instituted attribute and hierarchy change runs, which allow you to run this in the middle of the night or something like that. And so you actually have to, if you change the structure of a hierarchy especially, you have to do this in order to get that hierarchy to be picked up. So just so kind of everybody's aware, that's what went horribly wrong at the end of the last episode, is that I forgot to run the attribute and hierarchy change run, and then the hierarchy wasn't displaying anymore. So that's it. I mean, we're pretty much set. I've added those new attributes to the multi-provider. I've added them to the BEX query, which we don't really need to look at again, and we can go and see them in our BusinessObjects launchpad, and we'll just use analysis for OLAP here, I think, just to take a quick look at them. So this is the old connection that we defined based on the BEX query that I changed. We haven't changed the connection at all, so the changes in the query should just come through automatically. Yeah, another thing to mention here is that there are a few other options in BW as far as how to bring this data together. So we chose the option of using a master data lookup. Lookups in BW are pretty powerful. Another option would be to use a multi-provider if you're talking about transactional data measures especially. A multi-provider is a pure union. So if you have the same employee number or a related one or an attribute that is the same as the employee number, which is what it is in our case, you could do a union based on that attribute. And for some scenarios that actually works pretty well. And then in BW on HANA, the latest version of BW and the latest version of HANA, there's the concept of a composite provider, which is actually a join, not a union. And so you can define several different types of join between info providers. And so you can actually join together data at runtime or at query time, rather than the way we did it, which is really at load time. So those are both options as well. So there are a lot of options. All right, so we've got it up in analysis for OLAP. By default, we've got our product in the row, but let's pull in employee. And these are our employees from the sales database. They just have numbers. It's very user-friendly. So it would probably be a little bit better to pull in attributes for names. Let's just grab those first names. And then we can take a look at some of those attributes that we added in, like cost center and age group. Oh, and let's do job as well, because job actually came in from the HR database with text. So we've got all those now. Obviously, not the best format, but we can do aggregations by, say, job and age group. And job actually we load it in text from the HR database, so we can display those as text as well, which are a little bit more helpful. It's unclear why somebody who's a IT or finance person is showing up in the sales database, but such is the danger of joining databases. It doesn't always come out how you want it to. But yeah, that's how it's done in BW. It's not as simple as writing an SQL join. That's for sure. But it does allow you to take this structured approach to joining together data sets. And it's careful to allow you only to join things in that you've defined as attributes. So it does it. All those lookups are done based on the type of info object that you're dealing with. So it won't let you do a lookup on something that isn't the right type of info object, which is a blessing and a curse. I mean, everybody working with BW runs into these situations where it won't let you do a master data lookup because you got the wrong type of info object, and well. Sometimes it's tough, but it also keeps you honest in a lot of scenarios. So I think that's what we wanted to show today. Did I miss anything?
And the business, I guess, just to talk about the business value of what you just did, Ethan, is we had some sales data for salespeople, and we enhanced that data with HR data, which shows us the cost center they belong to. And also their age group, which is quite an interesting one. For salespeople, especially if you're looking at the performance of salespeople, if we added in something like salary as well, we'd actually be able to see, the revenue they're generating as a salesperson versus what they're costing the company, the age bracket they fit into, and whether people in the industry we're in a certain age bracket are more effective at selling and things like that. So
yeah, or like are we looking at a bunch of people retiring or something like that? This is So. Yeah, I mean that's useful in a lot of scenarios. I think it's a business question as far as whether it's appropriate to do reporting on some of those things. So doing reporting on an age group, you could run into trouble there definitely. So you don't always want to be able to pull everything together, but I mean that's another one of those things that we were talking about as far as governance. That's part of building a data warehouse is a little bit of control over what types of data you pull together. When that's advisable and when it's not, both as far as from technical concerns, but also as far as just it's business concerns. So
the other thing I really liked was the time dependent capability, effectively to set a date and to just return the master data, because for us to build that in data services is probably not easy. Yeah.
I mean it's. With BW, and somebody said to me once that with BW, with BW, easy things are hard, but hard things can be easy, and so it's. I mean, you've probably gotten the impression as we were working through a lot of this stuff that some of the stuff that seems like it should be really easy just takes time and is kind of user unfriendly sometimes, or buggy or whatever. But then you run into stuff like dealing with hierarchies, dealing with currency conversion, dealing with time dependency, and that stuff turns out to be pretty easy actually when it comes down to it. But working on a standard database is pretty hard to design. So there are pluses and minuses to working with BW, and time dependency is a major plus. Having to go through the process of building info objects for everything, even when you don't feel like it's necessary, that can be frustrating. And there's work being done there. So there's work being done on creating new types of data sources that don't force you to use info objects, where you can actually report directly on the data source layer, which is actually just the structure of the underlying database for the most part. So, and yet have BW's OLAP engine and security services and time dependency and everything on top of that if you want to. So hopefully in the future it'll be really easy to do this kind of agile data mart creation, and then sort of roll that into the data warehouse as appropriate. But yeah, we're not there yet. So there are
for viewers that are business objects, classic business objects consultants or developers, if they were interested in learning more about BW, what's the best place to start?
I just saw actually yesterday that the Business Objects account on YouTube is doing a whole series of kind of little how-to guides about BW, especially about Beck's Query Designer and how to build stuff there. And so that's a really good resource. Help.sap.com is an okay resource. It's a little bit tough to get started. There are the BW forums on SCN, which have a lot of stuff going on in them. There's a lot of activity there, and it's pretty easy to get answers to your questions. And people are pretty helpful as long as you follow the rules about searching first and that kind of thing. People are pretty helpful about answering questions even from beginners. And then of course there's what we've been using here. There's the trial version that's available on SCN in the download section. And so it doesn't work right out of the box, but if you have trouble, just ask on the forums, and somebody can help with that. We talked about in the first couple of episodes dealing with some of the issues. There are other ones, and if you run into a problem, just ask, and somebody will explain to you what to do.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for all the time that you put into this podcast series, Ethan. I think we've knocked up probably about 5 or 6 hours worth of content. So
yeah,
really appreciate
hopefully somebody watches. But yeah, it was a lot of
I'm sure 1 or 2 people have.
Yeah, it's always fun to work through this stuff. It's good to do it from first principles sometimes. And so it's really nice. Thanks for organizing it, Josh. That was really helpful.
Yeah, no, it was very informative for me too. So everyone watch out. We're going to be doing a podcast discussion soon as well, Ethan. Some of the other people in the community to talk a bit more about BW and its fit for the object community and some of that, and can kind of continue that discussion from a I guess more holistic perspective, not so technical. So yeah, watch out for that one. And we'll leave you to it. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Ethan.
Thanks, Josh.
This podcast is hosted and sponsored by EV Technologies. Visit us on the net at savethecms.com. DSLayered!